I'm absolutely delighted to pass over to Tomo Ishikawa, who is kindly agreed to pass us through or lead us through the next part of the discussion. And Tomo, I might allow you to introduce yourself.
Sure, Nick. Thank you very much. Do you hear me okay?
Very well. And I love the background.
Yes, it's lovely weather here in Paris. But just to give you a bit of background and introduction as well, as Nick said, my name is Tomo Ishikawa. I'm a Chief Regulatory Engagement Officer at MUFG, based in Tokyo, but I'm spending a lot of time here in Europe, including today. I'm here in Paris with lovely weather. So first of all, I want to thank you everyone for joining this event today. I also want to thank Nick and his team for hosting this great event, and thank you for inviting me to this panel, moderate this panel. I'm very excited, and I have been looking forward to this panel discussion because here today we will be discussing not net zero just from a financial perspective, but what does net zero mean from a so where do intersection of net zero pledged by financial institutions like MUFG and others, but also real economy actors that of course will be driving the real transition of the real economy, because at the end of the day that will actually change or reduce the emission. Of course, finance can catalyze, encourage, enable transition, but at the end of the day, it's the real economy actors, corporates, that will drive the transition. So today, we'd like to spend the next 50 minutes or so discussing how net zero pledged by financial institution can, to some extent, enable, assist the real economy decarbonization. But is there anything missing? What can we do more for financial institution to help catalyze transition of the real economy, but also want to discuss what policy measures can be taken further to accelerate the net zero transition of the real economy. So let me first introduce our 4 panelists. As you see on the screen, we have distinguished panelists today from, again, real economy corporate actors. From your left, you see Mr. Adam Pradela, Executive Vice President, Corporate Accounting and Controlling from Deutsche Post DHL Group. Second, Mr. Klaus Kunz, Vice President, Head of ESG at Bayer. Then Giulia Genuardi, Head of Sustainability Planning, Performance Management, and Human Rights at Enel. And last but not least, Christoph Jaekel, VP Sustainability Strategy at BASF. So for distinguished panelists, we will be discussing how net zero of financial institution, but also all the policy measures that EU, but also not just EU, globally, including like ISSB that Nick just touched on, how these packages will help real company corporates to accelerate their transition to net zero. But if there's anything missing, what can we do to help companies to accelerate their journey to net zero? But before I turn to panelists, let me just set the scene and then turn to other panelists as well, if that's okay. So just to give you a bit of a context, as many of you know, financial institutions, including MUFG, but many Europeans and American banks committed to net zero almost 2 years ago, before the Glasgow COP. GFANZ was formed by Mark Carney. There were 5 or 6 net zero alliances, including the one where we participate, Net Zero Banking Alliance. So there are banks, asset managers, all of these sectors committed to net zero, setting target for 2050, but also 2030 interim targets for certain sectors, especially high emitting sectors. So I think those steps that we took 2 years ago or last year, target setting, understanding the carbon budget, the science-based measures to set targets, I believe these measures were all helpful in mainstreaming net zero, not just in the financial sector, but in the more in general in the society. However, I guess the question now is, since almost 2 years, we made the commitment to achieve net zero. Of course, now all of these pledges need to translate into real action. And the way we look at it is that, especially for a commercial bank like us, we have existing lending relationship to all sectors, including high-emitting sectors, but also those sectors that are more aligned to net zero. But you, especially for large banks like us, we do not think divestment will work. I don't think that's the right way to achieve net zero, but rather it's more about engaging with all of our clients and facilitating the client transition so that our balance sheet will also become more aligned to net zero. One could argue that because of this finance emission relationship, your emission, corporate emission, are our emission. So to some extent, there's that dependency. I would look at the other way around, that your decarbonization is our decarbonization. So to some extent, there's alignment of interest. We're on the same boat together. That's how we, MUFG, engage with our clients in Japan, in Asia, and of course, the rest of the world. So I see this more of an opportunity as opposed to, we need to wait until the real economy to decarbonize so that we can achieve net zero. I don't think that's how we would look at it. Rather, we're on the same boat together, and how can we accelerate net zero transition? So that's just the context. Maybe that's the story from our side of our side, but I want to hear from the panelists today, because you are the ones who's actually developing the strategy on behalf of your group, accelerating your transition to net zero. And the question we want to focus on would be, what do you think financial institutions' role would be in your transition to net zero? Or what are the policy measures that you see helpful, not helpful? What do you think we need to do even further to accelerate the net zero transition? So let me kind of stop there as a scene setting, and I have a few questions that I would like to ask each panelist to cover. I hope that is okay. But let me start with the first question, which is, always we talk about this finance sector into net zero, but I want to start by asking each of you to explain your company's sustainable goals and targets, as well as your strategy to achieve them, and so that we can start the conversation from there. But your strategy, your target, and how have you been, how should I say, adjusting your strategy to achieve your targets and 2050 goals? So that would be the first question. If I may start maybe from Adam. Would that be okay to discuss your strategy, your targets, and how do you get there over the next 20, 30 years? Thank you.
Good morning. I hope it's technically working. You hear me? Yeah, okay, perfect. Good. Thank you very much. Greetings from Bonn. You see, I'm in my office, which is not a usual place where people are working at the moment, but yes, we are working in the office. And I think it's a part of, as well, important part to get back from the pandemic time. So back to your question, I think in 2010, 2015, and during the years, we defined the strategy for us, how to get our emissions down to a level which is feasible. We are, maybe as a starting point, we are one of the biggest airline industry with many aircraft flying around the world and producing, of course, quite big level of emissions. We as a transportation company as well have a lot of vehicles, the same problem, produce a lot of emission. And we have as well buildings around the world, our warehouses, our hubs, which are as well not always environmental friendly. So what we decided in a few years ago to get long-term perspective targets to achieve zero emission by 2050. But a few years later, we recognize this target is very long oriented, a kind of aspiration level. So we need to get more tangible, more clear targets in a shorter perspective. So 3 years ago, we announced our ESG strategy, which was quite a big success. And we clearly defined targets not only for the E, but as well for S and G. For E, we said we will be at the level of below 29 million tons CO2 by 2030, including or excluding offsetting. So we said our journey for the next 10 years, from today's perspective for the next 7 years, will be to reduce the emissions, despite that we still growing very fast. What's happened in the meantime, of course, you probably know, during the Corona crisis, our business increased the growth rate significantly. So we are facing now, of course, the problem that we are starting after the crisis from a complete new level of emissions. But we still reconfirm the 29 because we believe it's important to get to the level where we'll be. What we do a lot. If I take the example of aviation, there's 3 streams. The most important, or not the most important, but the one which is at the moment the usual one, is to replace aircraft, to replace by more efficient aircraft, to get aircraft with lower emission. The second, which is the most important, is the question of sustainable aviation fuel. So, fuel which will be with much lower or zero emission level. We are buying the fuel already, but still the problem is the availability in the market is very low. So our aircraft could fly with the sustainable fuel, aviation fuel, but the price is of course high, the availability is low. We hope that this will change in terms in the course of the decade, probably in the second part of this decade, so allowing us to achieve our target. And the last one, which is let's call fancy one, we are trying to support development of electro aircraft. It's still something which will take a lot of time, because as heavy are the batteries, as difficult is to fly. But there is already some tries. There is a lot of investment going in this direction, because this could be future, but it's as I said, it's a long way to go. In addition to the environment KPIs, we have as well a quite clear S KPIs. Why we'll have this? Because we are one of the biggest employee worldwide, with 600,000 people working for us in all countries of the world, in 220 countries. So it's, for us, it's important that the S KPI, the social one, is performing well, and we define clear targets how to achieve this. The targets for S are even shorter. Until 2025 is the first steps of the KPIs which we would like to achieve. So this nutshell, I think this is the major items we did in the last years, and it's not easy process, but I think it's something where we strongly, and the management strongly, believe that we have to go, and our contribution to the emission is still very high. It's as high as the country of Switzerland. So we need to do something, because we can change the world if we really invest and change our modes of transportation.
Thank you very much. That's very helpful. As you said towards the end, I think investment is very important. But also, for example, in the context of sustainable aviation fuel, as you said, it's not just about the CO2 reduction, but also price and availability. You need continuous supply of these fuels. If not, even there's technology, if the supply isn't sufficient, or if the price is too expensive, it doesn't work, or there will be no global rollout. So I think all of those enabling environment, or those supply chain, will be very important for you to achieve your targets. But thank you very much for your introductory remarks. Maybe I'll turn to Klaus, if that's okay. If you could also talk about your targets, your strategy, and then go from there. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for having me here today. I will try to make it quick, but I love that we start with the business perspective, because this is what Bayer decided 5 years ago, at the time when it was time for commitments, which was for us 5 years ago, when we said in the future, sustainability and business have to be ultimately interlinked. These are not different topics. This is the same thing. And when you look at Bayer company working in pharmaceuticals, in health, and then also in agriculture, almost 50-50, we said our mandatory impact areas are basically health, equity, food security, and ecosystems and climate. So we need to make an effort in those areas. We need to make a difference in those areas. This is how we designed the commitments. There's 3 very big access commitments, 100 million women receiving access to contraception in low and middle income countries, for example, or smallholder farmers receiving support also in small and middle income countries, which goes with a significant business shift. It's a strategic business direction shift. On the other side, because today we are a little bit more on the environmental side, which is typical for a European conversation, to be very honest, becoming a carbon neutral company by 2030 in the meantime is mandatory. 5 years ago, it was a big step following science-based targets, but then also going downstream in agriculture, reducing our impact on the environment through pesticides and committing to a reduction by 30%. That was really a step in our industry to say that, to spell it out, and then also to walk the talk, and also reducing greenhouse gas emissions on the fields of our pharma customers downstream is from a dimension a much bigger commitment than to become a carbon neutral company if you just count the tons of CO2 we are talking about. Now, how are we executing? You can look into our annual reports. On our sustainability report under assurance, we report on progress against those commitments every year. If I want to pick 2 highlights from this year, I start with the problem. The problem we have, to be very honest, is scope 3 in becoming carbon neutral. I think we are not the only company. Many companies are struggling with scope 3 because it's one thing to take decisions in your own company. It's another thing to make your supply chain follow. So we are very honest and very open. I think this is something that we need to accelerate, definitely. We are not stepping back. We see many companies now stepping back from commitments, also using the offsetting discussion as an excuse to step back for reputational reasons. I think that's unacceptable. I think offsetting is one of the best mechanisms I have seen where private sector pays a lot of money to do good stuff. We need to make it work. On the other side, on all the other commitments, you will see that we are on target. And one thing I would like to really stress is that for the environmental impact reduction of, we always say crop protection, others say pesticide, that's already describing the problem that we have here. Is we worked with the University of Copenhagen and other universities to define a way to measure this. That's always difficult when we talk about impacts and measuring things. This year was the first year we were able to report on a number. We are already 14% down. And we have for all the things I have been talking, we have a business plan in place. I think that's the point. Sustainability has to transform also into a long-term business value and can transform into a long-term business value. And we have a number of nice examples, and that's very stimulating for our employees. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's very interesting introduction, because you first mentioned about, first of all, sustainability. That's the purpose, not necessarily just about CO2 or not E, but also S and all other factors that we have to take into consideration. You also mentioned about scope 3. Your scope 3 is basically somebody else's scope 1 and 2 is your or our scope 3. So at the end of the day, it's not just about you. How do you encourage whole supply chain to become more ambitious? That ought to be the agenda, not necessarily just about you. But it's very interesting to hear from you how you approach this scope 3. Thank you. If I may now turn to Giulia, if you could also discuss your target, your strategy, just as a kind of scene setting. Thank you.
So thank you very much. So I totally agree with Klaus when say that scope 3 is a fundamental issue, because it's exactly, if you work correctly in scope 3, we are saying that we are work all together in terms of reduction of CO2 emission, because it's a really systematic target. So in Enel, we started we are a utility, so it's absolutely clear that net zero and climate change is something that is our core business. So to define this kind of target, we have changed totally our business model in order to reach this kind of target, changing the generation mix to renewable energy, starting to electrify all the consumption. So we have changed totally our business model. But I think that it's really important that we have to be credible in this kind of target. It's not an easy task because, first of all, sometimes when we define target, we are not clear because net zero, as we know, means many, many different things. Klaus would say offset. Offset is a part, but it's not the net zero. Right now, we have to work to mitigation, to mitigate our climate change. So to reduce to zero this kind of emission with our own operation. The compensation, the offsetting, the carbon removal, if we want to be serious, should be only the last way when we have concluded all the action that we can put in place today, considering technological constraints that we have. Second element is exactly the level of ambition of this kind of target. So we are speaking about this kind of target, but who set the level of ambition? In terms of CO2 emission, it's more or less easy because we have right now science-based target that is more or less recognized by all of us. But in terms of other targets that are strongly related to climate change, like nature, like people, as the other colleagues said, we haven't the same science-based target that really define the correct level of ambition of this kind of target. And probably the company will compete on the target in the next future, because it's absolutely clear that we have different trends that don't guarantee that we have a positive trend year by year. It's absolutely possible that we will have a negative trend in 1 year and a positive in another one. So it's important that investors and financial sector will evaluate company compare each other, not only in terms of short-term results, but also in terms of roadmap. And this is a reason why the metrics and the certification of the process are a fundamental element. And so we are right now speaking about sustainable finance package is a tool to guarantee us exactly this kind of thing. So in our case, exactly as the other colleagues, we have a specific target. We have decided to anticipate our net zero, not using carbon removal for the 95%. Of our emission. We have only a bulk of 5% that for us in this moment, considering technological constraint, is impossible to abate. But we don't know. We have to work on innovation to try to go to zero in the next future. And we have anticipated this kind of trend from 2050 to 2040. But for me, it's important this kind of thing. And for us, credible target, but also credible action plan. And credible action plan means change business model. If we don't change business model, it's absolutely impossible to reach this kind of target. And especially it's important that we link climate, nature, and people. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. No, that I think makes a lot of sense. You mentioned about this correct level of ambition. In the context of E or climate, of course, there's global target 1.5 degrees. So it's to some extent, you could come up with more regional, more sector level science-based targets. But when it comes to like nature or human capital, all these things, there's no like global and there's more regional nuances. So how do you set the target that is ambitious and correct? There's clearly no guiding principle, but as you said, you need to set targets, you need to showcase progress year on year. Sometimes it's good, sometimes not necessarily as good. But you want to see kind of a momentum going so that all the stakeholders can evaluate your progress. But I think that's exactly the point that also from a financial service perspective, we want to see the progress, but keep the momentum going. But thank you very much. I'll now turn to Christoph. Thank you very much for your patience. Again, if you could discuss your targets, strategy, how you achieve your ambition in the context of sustainability. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Tomo, and thanks for having me here. So at BASF, we actually focus really on implementation. We have integrated sustainability in our corporate strategy. First time in the early 2000s, we do integrated reporting since 2006. And let me focus now on the current group strategy that we made 2018. So picking CO2 as the most prominent KPI, we set a target for 2030 to reduce 25% of our emissions based on the base year 2018. And if you put that into relation to a base year of 1990 that the EU Commission has, that is a 60% reduction globally. And we also are committed to reduce to net zero by 2050. Now, in terms of our approach, this is very important to us that offsetting is only kind of doing the last mile, kind of the safety flares and stuff that you cannot really replace. But for the majority of the emissions, we actually have looked from an innovation and technology perspective how to tackle that. And if you look at our company, half of our emissions are around about energy related, the other half are process related, because we're operating also assets at the very beginning of the value chain in chemistry, like the steam crackers and ammonia production. So heavy CO2 emitters where you need to find a technology solution. So we set up our strategy to detail actions into different levers. Which are green energy. So we have invested in the largest global wind park actually off the coast of Netherlands 2 years ago. So really to get access to green energy, and then implement technologies along other levels, like for example green steam. Steam we use for heating. This is important for doing distillation, purification in the chemical industry. Very important to us, and to connect then the steam to green electricity. So to convert it, go away from gas-fired boilers over to heat exchangers that you can then basically drive with green electricity, turn steam green. The next lever is new technologies. So really, find the right technologies to decarbonize. Actually, I like that word. Actually, even I'm a chemist and I know decarbonization. I'm not meaning it in a literal sense here. I'm meaning it figuratively. That we really find the means to run these steam crackers without emitting CO2, because that is necessary to achieve net zero. We cannot always kick the can down the road and ask our suppliers to do their job. At a certain point in time in the value chain, you come at the point where the real emissions are happening, and that's where you need to find the solutions then at that point in time and that place. So we have started a pilot plant here in Ludwigshafen together with Linde and SABIC to really look into electrified steam cracking, to really connect it back again to green power and to avoid any incineration of fossil fuels there. Then a fourth bucket is to bring in more and more non-fossil feedstock, because every time you burn fossil feedstock, you generate fossil CO2, and that is what you want to avoid and bring down. And the last bucket is actually something that we do already since almost 170 years, since we have been founded in 1865. That's operational excellence, because every efficiency increasement in the chemical industry, since we're handling carbon, we are the guys handling the carbon, is A, improving our economics, but B, is also reducing CO2 emission by reduced attrition of CO2 of carbon along the value chain. So that is what we're focusing on, and maybe let me also share and chime into the Scope 3 discussions. Exactly the perspective on the current availability of credible data is our major concern, and has until now at least has come to the decision of us not setting a Scope 3 target yet. We're looking into this. Obviously, we're running a supplier program, as any company is running that, trying to improve the data quality also by standardization work. But at the moment, this is still very much more difficult than really dealing with your own emissions. I think this is one of the sticky items in this whole journey. Maybe last 2 words along the other pieces of the ESG journey. Obviously, the social dimension is very important to that as well, and we have the appropriate supply chain targets set in place to improve consecutively the quality of the work that's been done along the value chain, to make sure that we have the appropriate due diligence in place, and to cover actually all our suppliers with the relevant audits to make sure that this is setting up in a good manner. We have other targets. I don't want to go into detail with them now in terms of our employee engagement, in terms of, for example, women in business and these type of things that are very important for us as well. But I think the focus of today's panel is probably a bit more on the CO2 part. So I'll stop here.
Thank you. Thank you very much. You mentioned this energy-related emission and also process-oriented emission. That's we also hear the same kind of a story from our clients in Japan and Asia, especially from chemistry, but also other high-emitting sectors, because at the end of the day, as you said, it's about supply chain and also about scope 3, not just about your operations. But thank you very much. With that, and we only have like 15 minutes or so, and I was hoping to do 3 more rounds, but maybe I'll ask 2 questions, combine that into one, which is about how you view, first of all, the EU sustainable finance package. Of course, that includes taxonomy, that includes disclosure, but this, 4 or 5 years ago, started as a finance package, but of course that will have impact on your strategy, your target. So I'd like to hear from you how you assess EU sustainable finance package, of course, as of now, but if there's anything you want to see more from at the EU level, I'd love to hear. That's the one pillar of the question. The second would be, how do you define the role of finance? At the end of the day, this finance package is more to promote or mobilize capital, but your targets, your strategy, thank you for sharing, but how do you define the role of finance, the value we can add, many of us committing to net zero, but that does not necessarily translate to your action tomorrow. You have your strategy, you have your target. So where do you think finance and your strategy can intersect? How can we reinforce each other? Will be the second question. I know we're running out of time, so maybe whether you want to touch both or just one, whatever is comfortable for you, if you could touch on those 2 questions. Maybe again, I'll start with Adam, if that's okay.
Yeah, very good. I think let's start with the first question. I think we are clearly supportive to all the initiatives with regard to regulation. For us, the most important is in the past, we have so many various regulation framework that is real time to come to one common view. And I think the European legislation, definitely with all the problems what we see with the speed, with the difficulties to define, is going still on the right direction. We were very happy to have someone from my team in the technical group defining the new rules. So we had good insight there. We have we're supportive. The major problem is, of course, the common view between the European legislation and the ISSB. This is for someone like us working worldwide, important topic. We would like to have, like IFRS, one legislation for the entire world, for all our countries and companies worldwide. And this is something where I think the major focus should be in the next months to get some clear alignment. I think the European legislation is now more or less defined, and we believe with the final product we can manage to deliver what is requests. It will be not easy, but I think it's in some areas at the end of the day is more softer than was originally planned, which we are happy about. And the materiality analysis, I don't want to go to the details, is getting no crucial one, because then you can define what is important for you, what you will report. And we are at the moment working on the topic. So I think overall, very supportive, because this is bringing us to one common standard, hopefully one common standard worldwide.
Thank you. Thank you. Maybe Klaus?
Yeah, I will put a little bit of water in the wine. But before saying that, I think the financial sector is extremely important to drive the industry. I mean, we need to help each other. We are not like the financial sector, not the industry. There's always different opinions in every company. So I think the ESG like-minded or sustainability like-minded people in the financial sector and we in the industry, we need to team up and support each other more than we do now. Now on the framework that we see in Europe, a couple of points from my side. Of course, if you say sustainability and business needs to be interlinked in the future, then you also need to say that financial and non-financial, or maybe it's better say extra financial reporting needs to be integrated. I think that's very clear. So we are very supportive of respective frameworks, but they need to be supportive. And if I look at the taxonomy as it stands today, it's hard to see that it really stimulates the big transition in the big companies because most of them are excluded. And also it does not take social parameters into account at this point of time, which I think is a problem because when we talk about sustainability, we always talk about trade-offs. Just a very nice example, food production, we need more, but we need to have less impacts. There is always trade-offs in decisions and they need to be reflected in the regulation. And I think there's a gap in the taxonomy. On the CSRD, I would like just to mention quickly 3 things which I find problematic. We have a lot of dimensions in the CSRD with the new ESRS, with the new standards which are being developed, but they are not at the same level of maturity. So this is important. The carbon accounting is not at the same level of maturity than biodiversity accounting, but it's considered to be at the same level. And if we already have a greenwashing conversation on carbon, what's going to happen to biodiversity when we will bring this data into our annual reports? Just want to point to this as an upcoming issue. The second point I want to raise is we want this whole thing to be an instrument that investors can make better decisions, better informed decisions for green action, which is great. I'm completely behind this, but we are potentially creating Mount Everest of data. And how is this data being aggregated that investors can really make a well-informed decision and that we are not collecting data for the purpose of collecting data? This is something which I'm a little bit nervous about at this point of time because there's so much requests on reporting at different maturity levels. And last but not least, was also mentioned before by Adam, we are operating in an international framework. And in the international framework, the new legislation is asking us to collect data also in the value chain, which in other jurisdictions may be even forbidden to be collected. And I think this is also an urgent call, not only between harmonization between ISSB and CSRD, but we need to have, for example, the Americans back at the table, and we need to have that international convergence rather than divergence that we see at this point of time, because as corporations, we are running into issues here. Because if the case comes true, which I just described, that we are asked to collect data which we are not allowed to collect in other jurisdictions, we are running into legal conflicts very, very soon. These are points I just wanted to raise. We are behind this evolution. We want the framework to be supportive and stimulating innovation, and a bit less of reporting. And we like that there's a target to reduce reporting, but it's a bit contradicting the scope of CSRD at this point of time.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's about practicability and also interpretability. How do you make it, implementable, not just a, kind of a framework? And it would be nice to have all these data, but can you actually collect the data? Giulia, your comments on about the EU sustainable finance package, but also the role of finance?
Yes, I totally agree with my colleague, but I would like to say this kind of thing. I think that we have started in a reverse way. So we didn't started considering what is useful to evaluate a company and to support the transition. We started to define how we have and what we have to disclose. So we are working a lot in terms of disclosure. We are preparing a long list of topics that we have to disclose. For the company, this kind of thing is an enormous cost because we have some specific nuance, but we are saying always the same thing. So I think that the sustainable finance package is a big opportunity that we have, but in this moment is the backbone of disclosure. I am really curious of the use of this kind of information, especially by the financial sector, because I don't really convinced that this enormous amount of information are really useful for the investors. And I think that if the investors want that the company reduce the cost, in this case, we are adding cost, not using this kind of information. In some cases, we have to consider two enormous elements. One is that when you disclose something, you work on that. And so you know very well your process. And it's exactly the case of Scope 3 emission. We are working a lot on Scope 3, and we are reducing cost also knowing this kind of thing. On the other hand, if we had information without clarity, with different level of maturity, and sometimes we have different moments to have this kind of regulation in the sustainable finance package, we have enormous incoherence between this kind of regulation. The director of DG FISMA before says that when we conclude the CS-DDD, we will change again the SFDR, but the company have to work on that to prepare this kind of information. So we can't change in this kind of way. So I think that we have a stop for a moment and thinking what is useful really to support this kind of transition.
Thank you very much. Christoph?
Yeah, thanks. So I think my panelists, fellow panelists, have already summarized it very nicely. I recognized many of the items that are so important from my perspective and affecting our industry. Maybe let me focus on 2 to 3 things in addition. I believe that we all drastically underestimate the effort that in implementation is coming up, but also in designing such complex and transformational legislation. If I pick taxonomy as an example, because we have been now through already 2 reporting rounds, the latest now also with the alignment, I have seen that we are not ending up in a level playing field here. So the legislation is by far not there where it should be. I'll give you one very specific example. In this reporting cycle, the automotive industry were able to claim e-vehicles as taxonomy aligned. The chemical industry was unable to claim battery materials that are essential for the batteries to run e-vehicles, was unable to claim them to be taxonomy aligned. Now, we have been fortunately already, let's say, going a bit in the right direction and trying to fix some of the early bugs, and this is progressing. But I just want to emphasize the companies, as Giulia also pointed out, have to deal with these things. We have to get all the working processes internally up and running and do all these things, and then we have to fix it on the go again and again and again, because things have to be corrected and further improved. This is a lot of internal effort, and please don't underestimate this complexity and this effort in the reporting inside of the companies. This is binding a lot of resources, and this is maybe the second point I really want to emphasize. All these resources that you bind in disclosure is actually putting away resources from the actual doing of the transformation. So please be mindful and not overburden companies by just feeling that you have to generate a lot of transparency that in the very end is maybe not needed. And I think there we need to have a conversation, maybe also teaming up between the manufacturing industries and the financial markets, what is actually really needed. In my discussions with many of the investor side, I got very much often mirrored that taxonomy, for example, is actually not forward-looking. So it's not really useful for the financial market to evaluate the performance of the companies, because usually you guys are needing forward-looking methodologies, which taxonomy is not. And so please have a conversation, or let's have among all of us a conversation about what is really needed and what is helping us. Maybe to take a slight last deep dive into CSRD, because Klaus, I think you covered it very well, but I have to add one additional point. So there's actually the requirement to report on gross risk. So I don't know if many of you people know what a gross risk is, but the issue with the gross risk is that you have to somehow define the baseline. What is the starting point, the point of zero? And I just ask you a question: is process safety investments in the chemical industry Is that something that we have to consider not doing as to come to something of a gross risk perspective? I don't find that very helpful, and frankly, I cannot imagine that an investor has any interest in a gross risk. They rather have an interest in the net risk, what is still there and what is not yet mitigated. So please be pragmatic and be mindful about actually how things help shaping the journey on our transition pathway, and leave out what is actually really unnecessary.
Thank you very much. No, I think we're hearing a common theme. At the end of the day, what we are all trying to do is to encourage more investment, more innovation, more real action, real emission reduction, as opposed to compliance exercise, just disclosure for disclosure's sake, or just massive data, but not necessarily be truly useful. So I completely agree. How can we translate this pledge into actual strategy and outcome, not just about compliance exercise? But maybe just given we only have a few minutes to go, I'll ask you to do a maybe 1 minute wrap up. But my question is that there's more, how should I say, pressure to some extent from all the stakeholders saying you need to be more ambitious. We're getting some pressure as well, saying MUFG, you committed to net zero, good, but you need to be more ambitious so the world can drive transition. But do you think, all pressure from outside stakeholders saying you need to be more ambitious, do you think that would be, I shouldn't ask it if it's helpful or not, but do you think that kind of pressure will actually keep the momentum going? Or do you think it would be more important that we actually report progress and people actually can assess and evaluate what we're doing, as opposed to say, you have to be more ambitious, 2030, 2050 has to be like 2045, something of that nature, because at the end of the day, we're still talking about 20, 30 years from now. Rather, I think we need to be reporting and showcasing the real progress. But I'd love to hear how you see from your side. But again, given we only have 2-3 minutes, if you could also try to wrap up anything you wanted to communicate, you forgot to mention, any comments would be very much appreciated. Adam?
I think with the ambitions level, I believe we should get to the normal situation where our non-financial, our ESG should be analyzed, report, and disclose with the same level as our financials. This is one simple part of our integrated view on the business. We should have realistic targets, realistic target for the next year, realistic target for the next decade. We should be not over ambitious. We should not get over pressure from external views. This is how the business will manage this. If we define targets which are already today visible as unrealistic, nobody will get trust, nobody will support this. I think to finalize as well, the role of the financial institutions is for us important. I think our quarterly exchange show this topic is getting more and more important. I think you should challenge us in a realistic way, and I think the portion of the ESG topics should be growth much faster. So portion means the time you spend to analyze what we do. And of course, at the end of the day, we have to get to the realistic figures, how much we spend for the ESG, for environment topic, and if the spendings are done always not only in a good weather situation where our business is growing, but as well in a tougher time where maybe our results, our EBIT are going down, but we still would like to do something for the environment. This needs to be recognized. This is something which is important to see support from your side, from the financial institutions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Klaus?
Super quick. I think credibility is at stake. For me, it's the time to execute and not to make the next wave of big commitments. While I agree, we are not ambitious enough, but we need to show execution first. And I think that will take 1 more or 2 more years. And from there, we will make more commitments and to expand into more, because we need to step up. I agree, but execution is key.
To agree. Giulia?
I think that we have to be realistic and also to be sure that it's normal that we can change also the solution that we use to achieve the target. So we don't have to change target, but it's possible that the context change and we have to be ready to change a little bit the action that we put in place in order to guarantee the survival of the entire system that is not an easy task. And also the financial world have to support us to do that. So excluding or not, I don't think that is the way that we have to use.
Fully agree. Thank you. Christoph?
Yeah, I believe in any hype, it is the challenge to keep the balance between what's really possible and what's desired. And I think at the moment we are a bit more on the desire side than on the possibility side. So my pledge would be let's stay driven by desire and pushing things, but really stay grounded and always check back what's possible. If we lose that, then we lose the whole transformation. Because we are unable to follow, and then this gap will basically derail the whole process. And I also chime into the pledge of Klaus. It's time for execution. It's really time for execution. It's not time to change always the rules. We have to stick with some rules and make them happen first, and then do the next round. Not the other way around. Another sign for hype.
Thank you very much. I think we run out of time. So again, I appreciate all of you for great discussions. I think again I'm hearing a common theme. It's about realistic, but we need to be ambitious. But it's time for execution, not just another pledge, but rather we need to execute. We need to showcase progress. Then of course, all of us becoming more ambitious and showcasing progress. Maybe there's more opportunity for all of us to become more ambitious. And again, so it's more of a cycle that we have to be creating. And of course, finance can catalyze, enable your transition. But at the end of the day, we alone cannot do it. You may not be able to do it on your own. I think all of us as an ecosystem, we need to work this together. So with that, I'd like to thank again